When you play in the disruptor sports space, like some of the other things that we're involved in, you have to play probably on a slightly longer time frame. But the reality is, as you say, is it's not an endless hole of investment, and your revenues need to catch up with your costs pretty quickly.
Very happy to welcome Tom Burwell. He is the CEO of BSG. Tom, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Sean. Nice to be here.
Not a problem at all. I always like to start the podcast is understanding people's sports business journey, how they got into the world of sports. If you take your mind back, how did you get your break or your start in the world of sports?
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure the best way to answer it. I've had quite a diverse approach to the business of sports, but long and short of it is after finishing playing rugby, I was part of a business that we launched with another guy called Tim Lacey called Ultimate Rugby Sevens. Ultimate Rugby Sevens was set up to be an agency that kind of managed commercial rights, media rights, all things Rugby Sevens, which was done 8 years before the Olympics took place in Rio, the first Rugby Sevens Olympics, and a year before the decision itself was taken that Rugby Sevens would be joining the Olympics. Evolution 1 of that and Evolution 2 of that failed pretty miserably. We lost a load of money. And I probably somewhat stumbled across Evolution 3 of that working quite well, which then spiraled and scaled sort of to all 5 continents around the world, and was really fortunate that happened.
So, I mean, I've been lucky enough to have a lot of athletes that then, gone into their second phase, and some of it in the world of sport. Was it conscious that you wanted to stay in sport? You wanted to stay in rugby? Were you always, when you were playing, looking at the back of house and how the game was run?
Well, there's probably a family business to this. So if we go a bit further back, my father's probably only ever earned a penny from the game of rugby, both as a player, a coach, and then an administrator at the very highest level in England and around the world. So I think it's probably somewhat being really fortunate as a 7-year-old through to a 15-year-old of seeing some things around the world that open up my mind to the world of sport. I'm fortunate to experience sporting occasions, fortunate to probably be behind the scenes and standing there as that little kid that was probably in the way of everybody, but was really lucky to see that this is something which is incredible. And to be honest with you, I probably didn't give it any single second thought that the only thing I was ever going to do was work in sport, because it was the thing that I naturally probably felt was my calling. I'd like to say that there was a bit more of a conscious thought. And speaking really honestly to you, Sean, at times over the last 20 years, I probably wish there had been a bit more of a conscious thought, because, this is a challenging industry. It's an industry that you have to, work exceptionally hard and make up a lot of sacrifices, whether you're on the field or off the field. And even today, as a 42-year-old with a young family, I think some of the decisions that I take are ones that potentially I wouldn't have to in different industries. But as I say, it's been the family business for a long time, and one I'm very proud that I continue to be able to work within.
Well, that does give it that context of, one, you obviously being an athlete and getting to play, but also having a bit more understanding of the world of sport and all the work that is done by administrators, coaches, and the like. You spoke about, I guess, that early work in Ultimate Rugby Sevens and the trials, the disruption, hey, we tried this and we failed. What were some of the things you learned out of those up and down years?
Yeah, look, we had a really clear vision that and there's some irony because we'll come on to some of the things that we're just about to launch under a different guise. But in 2008 to 2010, Tim and I had a really clear vision that the announcement of Rugby Sevens joining the Olympics was going to completely disrupt and, I wouldn't say revolutionise, but give opportunity for evolution within the Rugby Sevens game. And we were going to see a professional club game that sat alongside the World Sevens Series. And we actually launched the first ever professional, fully televised National Sevens Series in the UK in 2010, taking place across 4 events, top players across England and Europe. See a number of Australians as well, competing across these 4 events on Sky Sports. We paid for the production. We did basically put a lot of money into that. Speaking frankly, we were first mover, and we were first mover far, far, far too soon. The reality is there was an Olympics due to come in 2012 after the decision that Sevens would join, and Sevens wouldn't be in those 2012 Olympics. We'd launched in the UK, yet the UK was going to host the Olympics in 2012, and again, Rugby Sevens wasn't involved. We were 7 years away from, the Australian women winning gold in that amazing way in Rio, and Ben Ryan and Fiji winning for the men. we just went too soon, and we made an assumption that there was going to be media rights associated with something far too soon. We went too heavy with our investment in different ways to a sport that wasn't ready for it. I also, when I think back now, many of the things that we're seeing in the disruptor sports landscape today, whatever sport that be, whether that's baller league, snow league, rugby sevens, world supercross, any of these things which sit slightly on the outside of mainstream, we now have access to fans via social media networks, via the ability to speak to people, algorithms, etc., that we're in control of our own world. Back then, you were completely at the beholden of linear and behind paywall TV deals.
Yeah.
And we managed to be on Sky Sports, but we were on Sky Sports at like 10 p.m. at night, and we'd paid for that production. Production cost us £250,000. You know, we're on as a highlights package when no one's watching it. Reality is that revenue didn't follow. So I don't know whether that's necessarily that it taught me a great deal in that I would change things now.
There's
but
a lot of lessons in being the early adopter, like the way too
correct
early guy, and
correct.
Correct. I can say that as someone who owned an esports franchise, 5 years ago, and understand same sort of things. Oh, we've got to do this, and again wasn't ready. But like the fact that you didn't have TikTok, you didn't have social media, you couldn't, now you've got your own distribution channels. Those production costs now completely different. For a long time, so for a lot of your early career, you were in rugby, whether it was Rugby Sevens, working with Emirates in Dubai Sevens. Was it a conscious decision to go and have a look and work in Formula One to get out of that bubble of rugby?
Yeah, I'm pretty honest about this. Like I my time in rugby had run its course for all those reasons that I say about my family business and so on. It has, I was kind of exhausted by it. I probably wasn't the best boss. I probably wasn't the best visionary anymore in that particular sport at that particular moment, because I'd been exhausted by some of the challenges that were self-created, some of the challenges that were third-party ecosystem created. And I don't necessarily say that I went actively looking, but I certainly was ready for engagement, and fortunately had been pretty successful and had managed a business through COVID in a way where I think we'd come out of it in a really strong way. Lighting up the Burj Khalifa, saying Rugby Sevens will return, in that sort of iconic moment, really sort of pulled the World Series itself out of COVID, and that shone a light on me to be, Formula One got in contact and said, look, you're running a event at the moment on the World Series. Would you like to come and run our race business, and which ultimately is the commercial contracts of the 24 races that take place on a Formula One season? And I was ready for that jump from rugby. I'll be really honest with you, it was a very, very steep learning curve once I landed in Formula One.
Because that would be my next thing. It's like you've come from a lot of rugby, and you've been steeped in it, and there's long tradition, and there's a lot of things that they do that well. But then you're going into, Formula One, and just to time code it, 2020, 2024, in the success and the growth that it was happening. What was that, rate of learning and get up to speed and I guess take on that? Like, were they more accepting of rate of change and, hey, we really want to push the boundaries because they're in that growth in that hockey stick sort of the curve?
I think a bit of both, right? So, benefit from the fact that having really endemic fans, really traditional fans, and also really new fans, recognizing that the training wheels have been taken off by Liberty Media and the ability to really pursue digital vision and fan experience, and almost this hybrid of bringing a lot of the American learnings over into a wider global space. Also, the quantums that you're talking about financially are just so different. And in many ways, you're further away from a sport than you've ever been when you're working in Formula One. Formula One is a business-to-business ecosystem and paddock where businesses and people within businesses and individuals themselves are creating more business for themselves, right? And the sport is taking place around it. And with that sport, it's incredible. But my involvement in that sport had never been further apart. I was pretty close to sport previously, and I could touch it, I could feel it. I had no impact on what the sport was here, but I had a huge impact on how it could be framed by our promoters and so on. And I think that really helped me understand the business of sport in a different way, and not just the development of the sport itself. It also continued to teach me that The first thing that you've got to get right is the sport itself. The sport's got to be at the heart of every decision. And I say this all the time, the sport is not enough. And many sports will just be like, we're going to just get that piece out there and be so reliant on that. And that's, Formula One itself really, really understands that, the 2 hours that take place on a Saturday on a Sunday when the drivers are racing is not enough for it to be where it is today. The reality of the entire ecosystem of framing and content that sits around it is the bit has driven the hockey stick growth that we've seen since Liberty Media took on in 2017.
And do you think, again, Rugby Sevens was known for the festival, the event, what the live thing is for the fan. And, we've seen the, tennis and the major opens being, hey, it's a place to be seen. And, and F1's very much the same. I was lucky enough to go to Melbourne earlier this year and a couple of weeks ago in Singapore. And that festivalisation of sport, like, yes, the sport is still at the heart. You've got to have something there to cheer for and that contest. But it's also, you're going for the context, the concerts, you're going for to be seen, you're going for the Instagrammable moment. How much was F1 just leaning into that?
Yeah, I think that there's you've just got to be really careful with it. So F1 did brilliantly, but their media rights were already worth an enormous amount of money. And the reality is that the digital eyeball of between 50 and 100 million people each weekend far dwarf the 300,000 people that were coming through. So if you're a promoter and you've bought out the commercial rights and your opportunity is to monetize those 3 days to the absolute maximum, as is the case with the government in Melbourne, absolutely, they've got to bring through and drive yields on individuals. Formula One itself, its revenues for the race itself were already taken as part of the commercial rights buyout. I think the challenge that a sport like Rugby Sevens has, and it's a lot of the work that I've been doing recently in this space, is the media rights for Rugby Sevens were worth zero. And the event itself in Formula One is a 2-hour race. It might be that you've got practice and qualifying to help over the 3 days, but it's a 2-hour race. Rugby Sevens, it's not like that. It's not one final at the end. There's some rugby that starts in the beginning on a Friday and the final finishes on a Sunday. It's 36 hours. And I say this all the time. Rugby did the most rugby thing that I could possibly imagine, is that 50 plus years ago, it invented a short form version of the sport long before anyone talked about the short form version of the sport. And they made it longer than its long form version of the sport. So as in an age of digital consumption, those media rights are worth zero. And we've actually seen the World Series as less and less of the linear broadcasters have been able to take it, because the reality is you're like, okay, I've got to buy a package which is 36 hours long over 3 days. And also, in Dubai, where my only interest was the sole 3 days, I absolutely would. I reckon 80% of our ticket buyers were there for the entire package. They were there to watch Disclosure. Since I've left, they've been there to watch Stormzy. Beats on 2 is a bar sitting on pitch 2. There are 5,000 participants, all those things. But I don't think I really cared about the digital rights of World Rugby when I ran Dubai Sevens. But equally, that means the sport is where the sport is today, which is that it's struggling for a storyline. And that's where we are, is that we have to be digitally relevant as well as our promoters having physical opportunities for good yields.
So that we've got a few hop, steps and jumps sort of cover your career. You're now at BSG. Tell us what BSG does for the people who don't know, and sort of what your role is.
Yeah, sure. Look, as I say, I've been really fortunate to, I suppose, have a career that has crossed a number of sports and a number of commercial roles. Luckily and very fortunately, in majority of the time in leadership roles. And in 2024, early 2024, made the decision to join the ownership group of Kirill Louis-Dreyfus and Juan Sartori, who were in the process of setting up a sports group, which is in effect a holdco that sits across a number of sporting assets around the world, with the vision of the executive team that sits at holdco level, zooming into our assets to accelerate growth. We invest in sports or sports teams that have tribal fandom. And that tribal fandom is as such that quite often maybe that tribal fandom is underserviced. It is not serviced by its traditional, what we would say now, kind of progressive traditional media ways of thinking, and whether that's digital, whether that's content, whatever that methodology be. they're also quite often capital constrained, human resource constrained, or are concentrating on today. And as we as a kind of holdco we can invest and look through the telescope and kind of accelerate business and look to tomorrow. So the first investment was actually pre the group being set up, was Sunderland Football Club. Sunderland Football Club was in Division 1 at the time, having had consecutive relegations from the Premier League. We have owned that for 4.5, 5 years. And very fortunately now find ourselves competing at the top end of the Premier League. I say top end of the Premier League because we've had a great start to the season. What we really mean is competing in the Premier League again and again, doing everything we can to continue to be in the Premier League next year, both on and off the field. And the reason I say that is, we have to be Premier League ready to compete both on the field with the best footballers in the world, but we also need to be Premier League ready off the field to compete with the best sports executives in the world for commercial eyeballs, digital eyeballs, and both national and international relevance. We also own World Supercross, which is a traveling circus motorsport, which takes place this year on 5 continents across 6 weeks. Huge sport in Australia. Australia's always been a huge market and audience for us and continues to be. We race in Gold Coast in November. And we've also, coming almost full circle, we are currently incubating the world's first franchise Rugby Sevens league, not too dissimilar to what I launched back in 2008, which will be launching in August 2026, which also shows you the first mover thing when we're talking 18 years later.
Yeah.
And we're in the process of franchise sales for that. Plus, we're under exclusivity on 2 other assets. We're incredibly interested in top 14 rugby in France. We think that that's a market that is going to continue to see growth underpinned by a great broadcast deal. And we're very interested in sport that is coming out of Africa, which we see as a really next big market using much of the methodology that we've done previously.
So that's a massive remit. With multiple sports, multiple fan bases. There's a lot to unpack there, because there has been, in the last 10 or 15 years, this swathe of private investment, acquiring teams or getting into team ownership as a growth engine, but then also bringing their own sets of skills and skill sets to it. What do you think you and your team are bringing to, the Sunderlands, the Supercross to give that to, that, I guess, that growth accelerator you were talking about?
Yeah, I think, look, you're right. We're not passive investors. We're owner-operators of businesses. And one of the things that I did from the outset was we needed to invest in world-class executives that sat at a holdco level that many of these businesses wouldn't be able to afford to take on in a kind of isolated single vertical. So first of all, that gave me to access to people. We then invested in sort of what we say is a proprietary platform, but the reality of what that proprietary platform really means is, if you think of all of the digital requirements that those businesses may need above or below the line, how can we flatten the curve both on expertise, technology, and probably cost across those
shared services types models around some of those things?
100%, and not too dissimilar to what a traditional private equity model would look like, but potentially a little bit more hands-on than that. And then I think there's a reality to these things, which is that whilst that might feel, what is the comparable between Hayden Deegan, a 20-year-old motocross guy racing in the Gold Coast, to Granit Xhaka scoring against Everton last night? Reality is 80% of everything we're talking about is the same thing. And we're talking about driving eyeballs, digital and physical. We're talking about servicing brands, partners, sponsors, giving the opportunity to have them the largest voice we can do. Central league distribution, media rights, all of these things are the same things. We're really clear in the sort of 5 verticals that we believe we've got a level of expertise within. Then the nuance of, I call it what's the different flavor of ice cream that we're sort of maneuvering today, because the difference between a lot of the conversations we have in Sunderland and the conversations we have in Rugby Sevens are not wholly that different. I think where we face potentially our biggest challenge is when we're the owner of a league and we're the owner of a team. In an ideal world, we're interested in investing at league level IP. League level IP, we're in control of our own narrative. You're in control of the central distributions and you can build the sports eyeballs yourselves. Team clearly is impacted by what happens across the whitewash. Now, you can put all sorts of things in place to say that this works, but there's also a load of things that you can't control. And some of those have played out really well for us over the last 18 months. But equally, if you look at Sunderland the 3 years previous, we made the playoffs in the Championship. We then finished 17th, and then we made the playoffs in the Championship. You wouldn't say that that differential between playoffs and 17th is that much different, but something happened. And as a business owner, you potentially would rather not be facing those things. So Sunderland is the anomaly, not the rule. And that does mean that maybe instead of 20% difference, there's maybe a 40% difference in the way our football club operates compared to the way our leagues operate.
It's very different, I guess, fan challenge. You know, you've got Sunderland with this tribal fan base and traditional fan base. People who listen to the podcast will know Sunderland till I die, and the story behind it. And then you're going to completely greenfields, new franchises, new teams going through the sale and being in that new fan growth piece, which we've seen it happen in cricket and other leagues that were popping up. All those other leagues you're sort of talking about. How, again, that shared service, the membership team that works with Sunderland and the membership team that's working with a new startup club is, the challenges are very, very different. How do you try to get that, I guess, model working and get them to help one another?
Yeah, they are different, but we're only interested in investing in sports which already have a level of tribal fandom. So let's recognize rugby has had its challenges around the world, but it's still Rugby World Cup level has multi-millions of fans around the world. World Supercross as both if you look at it endemically as motorsport fans, and then you actually begin to look at two-wheel dirt bike fans, it is still by the notion of big sports. What we're not really interested in is the creation of fans. We're more interested in the maneuvering of fans. So I wouldn't be necessarily turning around and investing in pickleball or paddle. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely see it as a participation sport. I understand it as an infrastructure investment, but I am a fan and I'm going to watch a paddle competition online. That you've got to create that for somebody. We're not in that space. So
you've got tie-dye people who want to consume it, they want to be fans of it, and it's like, well, how can we engage them first, and then if you can get that, F1 driver side bump, new fans can come in, but you've already got a solid fan base. It's been under-delivered, poorly delivered, not delivered at all, and that's where the opportunity is for you guys.
Yeah, correct. I mean, if you look at rugby, for example, I would say that there's a number of major rugby markets where there is clear interest in the sport, where they are not necessarily being serviced particularly well by a domestic game. They potentially are by their international game, but their domestic game is underservicing them, certainly via digital eyeballs. Media rights not worth a huge amount of money, and that's not necessarily engaging the right demographics of audiences. The interest is there because there's a legacy and there's a history of doing so. So, we're interested in kind of reigniting fandom that is already in place, or moving fandom, or bringing fandom together as well. I think that we recognize that the men and women's game are different. The rugby and sevens game, the men's 15s game and the men's sevens games are different. We recognize that motocross is different to supercross, but how can we ensure that the sort of middle 20% between a motocross fan and a supercross fan is engaging in both of those audiences? I'll give you an example of something we've done in World Supercross is that, or in dirt bike world, really. So supercross and motocross is quite tribal within the tribe. You put your hand up and you say, I'm an AMA fan. That means you're a domestic series fan in the US. Or you put your hand up and go, I'm an MXGP fan, which is the motocross that goes around the world. Or there might be I'm a dirt bike enduro fan. And so I sort of said, well, look, if we double down on our content channels being World Supercross, all we're really doing is pacing ourselves against each of those tribes. So can we create a content channel that puts our arms around all of those things and embraces the culture of dirt biking? And then within that, then clearly level and layer our own World Supercross content within that vertical. So we created the World Dirt Collective, which is something that had never been created before as a kind of a content vertical that embraces all forms of dirt, podcasts, live linear broadcasts, non-live, long form, short form, you name it. 15% of that's World Supercross. But that 15% is now being watched by all of those other fan groups because it sits in a non-tribal space and is just embracing all things dirt bike. I think there is a way to look at embracing verticals of digital content that doesn't necessarily only speak about the thing that you own the rights on. And in this world where you control your own media distribution, you can basically become your own media channel. And then within your own media channel, what's the work that you want to do?
Yeah, well, I mean, that goes back to, 18 years ago when your one shot was
Correct.
getting on Sky. And it's like, well, now we
Yeah.
can own our piece. Now, whether that piece ends up
100%.
on YouTube and there's a rev
Yeah.
deal there, or
Yeah.
we're using our own player, or
Yeah.
it's, connected into a Samsung
Or
TV,
it's a
people
mixture
hit a
of all
button.
of.
It's a mix, and because those big bags of money that, the Sky and the Foxes and that of the world, are getting fewer and fewer for the very, very tippy top. And it's like, how can you commercialize it? And if you get that tribe that wants to, I want a, $10.95, $9.95 a month, and I want everything dirt, like that, to me is the future, because you've got the channels and the distribution means to do that when you previously didn't.
Yeah, and look, I think and if I then take that bit of our approach of what we want to do and what we're doing in dirt biking to what we'll do in Rugby Sevens, rugby as an audience has got probably its endemic fans. Let's not be ageist, but let's say they're 35 and up, right?
Yeah,
And
I could probably say they might be even older than that.
Yeah, could be, right?
Yeah.
But let's say they're 35 and up, and there's a level of expectation about the way they expect to see their game. And what I mean by that is when they switch it on, it needs to look, it needs to feel, it needs to sound like rugby, right? And if it doesn't, it goes, oh, what's that? That's not what I'm used to. That's fine. We're all like that in our own way. Why don't I say that necessarily will help me service the next generation of rugby fans? So one of the things that we're doing at the franchise leagues that will have two very clear feeds. Now, people do this in their own version. Like Formula One did a kids commentary feed.
They do the kids broadcast.
Yeah,
the NFL.
correct.
The NFL did the YouTube out of the Brazil game where they had co-streamers. And again, it was the old white guys going, I don't want to watch my football for this. It's like, it's okay, mate. It's not for you.
Yeah, correct.
It's for the millions of people that watch TV and streaming through that.
So how we'll do this is that if you switch on to a linear in front of the paywall, so the entire thing will be in front of the paywall. You switch on to a linear TV channel, say it's here in the UK, I'll switch on to ITV, you'll see it how you expect to see it, because also the person that's switching on to linear TV is probably going to be the person that needs to see it that way. If you switch onto it on a streamer, it will look and feel completely different, right? Now, you'd argue that each of those people, if they saw it on the channel, they didn't like it, they probably wouldn't watch it and probably wouldn't like it. But we'll switch them that way. And then there is another group of fans who are live at the event. Locally, probably a 45-year-old dad with a 10-year-old, 15-year-old kid. And the live product can bring both of them together. And so we're doing a huge amount of work from the outset, which is, again, recognizing that we've got these fan groups and we need to make sure that these fan groups are serviced in a way that's appropriate for them. So I think you go back to that question about our portfolio. Whilst, yes, it is wildly, wildly different, it comes back to segmentation of your fans, recognizing that there are going to be large and small segments within each of those portfolios and that you need to service them appropriately. It might be, yes, that Sunderland is more serviced via a traditional broadcast methodology and behind the scenes sporting products that we've known and loved for many, many years because the Premier League can do that. And in other situations, we might need to be more nuanced, or we might need to be more creative. It's the same thing as we segment, we work out what those fans want, we work out how we take it to them, and then we, based on the numbers, embrace the bits that we need to do and serve them the content that is what they're going to consume, which ultimately triggers the revenue that sits behind that.
Well, that was going to be my next thing about the revenue piece, because investment is great and capital growth is great, but one of the things is you can't just keep going back and putting your hand out and saying, someone will pay the checks and,
Sure.
Oh, we just want to keep paying the checks as long as we win. You're like, what does sustainability look like for you when you're trying to roll those, whatever the investment is, whether it's Sutherland, whether it's the rugby, whether it's Supercross, how do you get to sustainability? What are the key things that you're looking for?
Yeah, like Premier League soccer is a different ball game. We run our club really, really sustainably, of course, and the central distribution really, really helps. You also need to be really clever with player trading, and you need to drive strong revenues in the Premier League. Now, One of the great things about Sunderland is we're a big club. We've got the 6th largest stadium in England with 49,000 fans, with 42,000 season ticket holders. We've come up and punched well above our weight in the commercial sponsorship space, which means that, we're competitive on and off the field, and that's great. And it gives us the opportunity to attempt to be competitive on the field. For some clubs who come up and might not have that fan base, that will be a lot harder. And so I think you have to take that into account. I think when you play in the disruptor sports space, like some of the other things that we're involved in, you have to play probably on a slightly longer time frame. But the reality is, as you say, it's not an endless hole of investment, and your revenues need to catch up with your costs pretty quickly. We've learned that in a harder way in World Supercross, because World Supercross is a expensive business to deliver. The reality is you're moving in most sport around the world. And I think it can show you how we've learned from that is that year one of a global Rugby Sevens business will only take place in Europe. So our 7 first events, whilst all of the franchises may come from all around the world, these 7 tournament season will only happen in Europe. And the reality of that is we want to make sure that we drive our revenues before we start loading up planes and flying long haul around the world, even if the market says so. World Supercross, we're committed to those 5 race continents, and you can imagine what that looks like. One of the challenges that means is that you need to make sure that your global revenue matches your global expenses. And that doesn't count as the local P&L, because the local P&L of running our race in Buenos Aires this week will be really successful. Enough fans will come through the door based on the cost of delivering that single event within Buenos Aires, no problems at all. You then lift up and go, right, okay, well, we've got a team deal where teams are paid. We've got riders are paid. They're paid on a global basis. We move those guys around the world. We have our global head office costs. None of those costs have been covered by that local event in Buenos Aires this week. That's all got to be global revenue. And also recognizing that our media distribution is not going to be able to demand, as you say, the big ticket options that potentially other sports are able to do. So you have to work really, really hard to build your audience digitally to then be able to deliver a sponsorship business. I think all of these disruptor sports require front-loaded investment, and you have to look at it over a much, much longer time frame. And why do we remain confident, and why, I suppose, do we go back to that point what I said originally, which is we'll only invest in sports assets that have got tribal fans, because what I wouldn't want to be doing is front loading an investment, trying to create fans, and then trying to monetize newly created. But like that for me is a recipe for a really black hole.
And so from a recruitment point of view and the people who are working in your org, so because a lot of people work in sport and they know that, they know the sport, they do it a certain way, but those kind of things of being really commercially driven and having that bigger picture, one, are you getting people from sport, or you're also getting people from corporate? Is it a mix? Or like, who are the type of people you, want to work in the sports you're in, and the teams and things you're investing in, or, what are the qualities they need?
Yeah, I think our holdco level are predominantly executives who have had touch and feel of some of the largest IP in the world. So if you look across our org, former CFO of Formula E, which in effect is a very, very large startup, CCO that comes from the Premier League in the NFL, Chief Product Officer that comes from Universal Music and British Airways, Head of M&A who comes from mergers acquisitions in betting. So large scale, used to big transactions, involved in really deep thinking, strategic, forward facing. And then I think within each of the organizations themselves, you need to make sure that you're nimble, creative, probably pretty young, certainly really in touch with how digital growth is taking place and audiences and understanding audiences and all of those. And then try and find those two sides to the coin to hold each other accountable, which is that the holdco really drives long-term economic strategy and the asset itself then delivers for the fans that we know that are there. I think, again, the football club is slightly different because obviously the revenues of the football club mean that it's an enormous business on its own. But finding the mix between football experience and wider sports experience, I think is hugely important. I think if you go back to the question you asked me is like, why did you make the jump from rugby? I am a far more all-round executive for my team, even just within one asset, by having been exposed to all the things I have been around the world. If I had just been that guy from rugby, even within rugby, I would be nowhere near as able as I believe I probably am today. So I do think that having a real mix of experiences, expertise, people, and I think it's, I talk about it sort of like there's got to be like a level of diversity of culture and experiences around the table to hold each other accountable to drive growth. And that goes from making sure that we recruit people that can hold me accountable and bring new things to us. And that can sometimes be as simple as just age, that the reality is a 25-year-old content creator that decided at 18 not to go to university just to create content via social channels and understands how to grow that is far better than I am at any of those things. And able to enlighten us every day on how to do that.
And I mean, I was having a conversation at a conference last week around, the sport does throw around the word innovation, but there's a lot of sports that like are sitting on their hands and they're like scared of change and scared of shaking things up because, hey, this is a successful tournament or this is a successful club. We can't do this. We'll upset too many people. And sometimes you just feel like you want to shake. How do you make sure that doesn't creep into what you're trying to do? Because you sort of want to do that sport startup. This is the way we want to go sort of vibe. So how do you sort of shake that up? Because there's a lot of sports that just go, everything we're doing is fine.
Yeah, I think that's probably at least half of my job. I think that's as much a cultural thing as it is a endemic thing. When we set up Ultimate Rugby Sevens and it became, the world's largest commercial Rugby Sevens rugby academy anywhere in the world, we set it up on this ideology that it was because talented rugby players who were potentially felt that they were underserviced by that traditional school rugby coach or that traditional club rugby coach who didn't understand them and said you need to be a square peg in a square hole, needed to be coached by 26 to 27 to 28-year-olds that had lived and breathed that themselves and said, hey, look, don't worry about any of that stuff here. We're just about having fun and getting the best out of one another and creating a culture. And it worked. And then one day I was 35 and I was not that guy anymore. And I had to realize I'd be like, oh, wow, I think I'm one of those guys that these kids relate to. And I'm now 20 years older than them. And they're like, who's this guy? Right. And I probably use that lesson more than anything in the organization that we're building today, which is we say we're going to be disruptive. We say that we're going to keep doing those things. And if we turn around and go, hey, we're just, we're just existing and continue to do what we did the year before, then I've got to challenge us. And I did it this morning. I'm an early riser and, there were some emails that went out at 4:00 this morning, which was just said, hey guys, hang on. We said we wouldn't be this and we need to hold ourselves accountable to that. And I think the moment that we stop doing those things will either be the moment that I'm beginning to fail or that we need to start making some really internal decisions to say, how do we make sure we fix these?
Yeah. I mean, I've been lucky enough to meet and talk to different people in different orgs.
Sure.
And it is the one where, a leader like a former Trailblazer owner, Paul Allen, Microsoft founder, he's like, he was a tech guy. He got tech. And so if you came to him and pitched him an idea and said, this is what it is, and here's the business case, this is what we'll do, he just goes, yes. Like, because with my people because, you don't get that culture of people trying to do that if you're not there. Like, too many get no's. Great to hear that. One thing I was going to ask you, and I still will ask you, but you've already exuded it. What about the future of sport excites you?
You know what? So much of it excites me still. I think that it is an ever-evolving beast because the realities are that we as a society are more demanding on than ever with regards to what we're going to spend our money, be it entertainment, social, etc. And that just because we've always supported Sunderland doesn't mean that we're always going to continue to pay our season ticket if the experience is, dry and dross. So we as owner operators of IP need to sit absolutely at the forefront of service. We are a service. We are a marketing and production agency, and we are servicing the eyeballs of those that want to embrace and consume our sports. I probably am remaining still quite a long way from the sport, and I thought that I got closer to it. But what I probably now feel is I feel like I'm closer to the fan than I've ever been, and a real commitment to whether you're a dirt bike kiddie that's been on it for 7 7 years and is riding a 65cc, or you're a 72-year-old season ticket holder at Sunderland, or you're my father who's 75 years old and still on the board of England Rugby and probably thinks some of the things that we're saying about rugby are a little bit different to what he remembers. We've got a responsibility to service everybody, because everybody is worth some money to us, and fans should recognise, and I'm really open about this, we are a business, and we are a business and a capital business, and one that is aimed to make money. But that should never come at the expense of making sure that you have the best experience on a Saturday at 3 p.m.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. I'm the same. Like, what's sport going to look like for a current 5-year-old, a current 15-year-old, a current 25-year-old that is still just getting engaged with sport, compared to, most of sport is consumed by over 50s. But this, what is sport going to be like when all of those, the current 20-year-olds are 40? What is the experience going to be? And that's going to be amazing. Tom, really do appreciate taking the time. I want to get to the Sports Geek closing 5. Do you remember the first sports event you ever attended?
Do I remember the first sports event that I ever attended? I can tell you about some sports events that I do remember going to when I was super young.
That's right. No one can Google it, so there's no wrong answer.
So I don't remember this one, but I was a babe in my mum's arms at Twickenham when England beat New Zealand 15-9 in 1983. I'd have been 8 weeks old. I remember going to Highbury. I'm a Tottenham fan. I went to Highbury to watch Arsenal versus Everton. I wore my Spurs shirt. Spurs lost to Swindon that day, and when that went up on the big screen, everybody cheered against me. And then I remember some really big events. I've been really fortunate to go to lots of World Cup finals. I've been to some Olympics, and they've all been a huge part of who I am today and taught me many, many things, both in experiences and also providing for my daughter. My daughter went to Chelsea Women on Saturday gone. She's been to 3 or 4 Premiership games this season already. She's playing rugby. I want to provide those same experiences that I had from a very young age to my daughter.
Absolutely. Same as a parent, going to the footy with my son. The best memories there are. The food at sports events has changed over the years. Do you have a favourite food or a go-to food or a favourite food memory at sport?
I remember the first time that I was at Los Angeles Dodgers, obviously winners of the World Series this weekend, and I've been going to LA for 25 years. And I remember taking my now wife to the Dodgers. It was her first experience. And she said, it will just be hot dogs and nachos. So you wait till you get there. And it was the most remarkable sushi experience you could possibly have had in the middle of a ballpark, which was still a stunning experience now, because somebody goes to Twickenham, I still can't quite imagine sushi being served at Twickenham.
Yeah. I mean, everyone was listening, waiting for you to say Dodger dog, but sushi. That's how sport has changed.
Great sushi as well, like really great fresh sushi. That was the beast.
Multiple businesses in different parts of the world. What's the first app you open in the morning?
First app I open in the morning is my Whoop app, which is my
So
my health app.
Is it to check if you slept well because you don't know?
No, it's not really. Look, I've been tracking my data for the last 6 or 7 years, and I'm an early morning person. I go to bed pretty early. One of the first things I do is I go and train, and leading a really active, healthy life allows me to also throw everything I can do into my work life. So I'm non-negotiable that the first thing in the morning is actually not work or sports oriented. It could be very easy for me to switch on a sports app and work out what happened the night before.
No, that's fine. It's always interesting. But I do joke something that with
Did I sleep?
How did I sleep? I better check my watch to see how I slept. Is there someone that you follow? It might be someone in the industry, someone a colleague, or someone that you think the podcast listeners should give a follow?
Do you know what I think? I'm going to slightly different turn on this. I think people should still read books.
Yep, no, books are fine. I normally say author in there, so you can throw in
that's
fine.
I've just read the latest autobiography by a guy that ran the NFL Players Association, and ultimately what is a trade union for the last 20, 30 years, and is the 33rd winner of the NFL. And the reason I say that is that there's so much stuff in our office where it goes, have you just seen this? Have you just seen this of somebody, an individual that is sharing information there and then? And I'm still such a believer in kind of real case study experience of embracing and learning from those that have been there and done that in real detail. So I'm a book reader rather than necessarily a consumer of social media following.
No, that's fine. The two that I always recommend is Angela Duckworth's Grit. Have you read that?
Yeah, I have. It's great.
It's a great one. And then I'm constantly rereading Phil Knight's Shoe Dog. Like that's the Nike
Awesome.
story. It's
Yeah,
an
yeah.
easy one. So I'll skip my last question about social media MVP, but you can answer it. What platform is the one that seems to be working the best for some of your properties?
I think we look at them all in slightly different formats.
Absolutely, yeah.
What I will say is that the way that YouTube is growing is and continues to grow in service, and if you as long as you're delivering and producing in the right way, is incredible. Find the way of engaging different audiences through TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. It's still, we produce one piece of content. We basically put a different filter of layer of production across each with it and push it out three ways. And it needs to, if I push out that one piece across the three, it fails. If I push them out three, I find that remarkable. And then for me personally, I'm kind of an active LinkedIner. And it's been really interesting to share some of our business growth via LinkedIn to people. And people have appeared to have appreciated some of the experiences that we've been learning with, both kind of a business sense. And it's been really interesting to watch and engage with that as a producer of content myself in that space.
Absolutely. And I think it's something that sports business overall, like we should be sharing more of our successes behind the scenes. You've got colleagues, you've got people who are in the
Sure.
industry that want to know. There's a lot of sharing there. And yeah, I'm a big fan of LinkedIn and the same. So we'll put a link to your LinkedIn in the show notes. Tom, I really do appreciate you coming on the podcast. Hopefully we're in the same part of the world sometime
Awesome.
in the near future. If you're in Australia, let me know. And I'll definitely let you know if I'm in your part of the world.
Love that. Thanks, Sean. Appreciate it.